Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Cruz. I wanted to take some time to talk to you about social emotional learning and how we connected that to various topics in ECIS 3700. So as you know, you're doing this course with Dr. Cummins in this upcoming semester, and we just felt that it would be important to kind of review what we talked about because even though we didn't have an actual topic entitled social emotional learning or study that independently of itself, we actually had that integrated in various topics throughout the semester. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to reference an article from understood.org. So you know that understood.org was a website that we referenced frequently in ECIS 3700 as it talks about students with learning difficulties and attention difficulties. But they have a various amount of resources that are available to parents and teachers as well. So we reference that, and one of the articles that I'm actually going to reference is titled How SEL Helps You as a Teacher. And so the wonderful thing is we were doing the 5 core competencies all throughout ECIS 3700. So what I want to do is I want to just quickly review those 5 core competencies that we that are within social emotional learning and what we're doing out in schools with our students. We're also supposed to be doing for ourselves as teachers. So we're going to talk about how we applied that for us in preparation of teaching out in field for us as educators, but then also as we talked about it in relation to how we could help students develop those core competencies. So number one was self-awareness. And so we talked a lot about helping students have self-awareness in terms of their strengths and challenges. And especially with having a disability, we talked about giving students that voice to express that. And we talked about those student-led IEP meetings. And that was really an opportunity where we took to really discuss how students could become self-aware and that they could begin to talk about that and express that with other people. And one of the other things that we talked a lot about was the growth mindset and how we can frame our classroom, frame our students' thinking in terms of when they reach difficulty or when they reach something that's uncomfortable to them or unknown or a time where they weren't successful, and how we can help them retrain their thought processes. And we also talked about thinking aloud. So even as educators, when we are teaching our students, that we think aloud and we share the times when we're having difficulty with something, and we talk through that with them and how we work and how we cope. And we again express our own self-awareness, our challenges and our difficulties along the way. Number two is self-management. And so we talked frequently about managing stress for ourselves as educators. If you remember, we did the Art for Kids hub. And we kind of took a time to decompress, and we talked about how important it is for ourselves as teachers to manage that, and then also what we can do for students in terms of offering the sensory table and a time where they can have away from the group and just kind of again decompress, or to teach them those coping mechanisms that they need in order to continue to be successful throughout the school day. We also talked about setting goals for ourselves as teachers and setting goals, helping our students set goals. So we talked about not just in IEP goals, obviously we talked a lot about that and creating IEP goals and how we help students reach those, but then also just kind of those personal goals, and it kind of goes back to that growth mindset, that power of yet, and we talked about that. We also talked under self-management about planning and organizing, so that executive functioning. And we talked about for ourselves as teachers how we need to be planned and organized, especially in special education, especially when having an inclusive classroom, when we have students on various ability levels. And so we have to plan and we need to be organized. And if you remember, one of the phrases that I talked about in the very beginning of the course when we were talking about going on this journey of creating an inclusive classroom, we talked about prior proper planning prevents poor performance, and how we do that for ourselves, but we also do that for our students. So when we're planned and we're prepared and we have that bigger goal in mind, right, our students are going to be more apt to be able to reach it along the way when we have those stopping points, which kind of goes also back to managing stress, those stopping points to take note, be self-aware, of what's going on and how we're dealing with academics or school or social situations for our students, but also then for us as teachers. The third core competency is social awareness. And you are going to remember, and I'm going to bring up the quote for you, but you know that I'm a big Coach K fan. And so one of the chapters we read was about empathy. And that really goes back to that social awareness for us to develop empathy and to also train and help our students to develop empathy for other students. So the quote, if you remember, was, if someone believes that you can identify with their situation and understand their feelings, they are more apt to trust you, which leads to faster responses to situations and better conclusions. And so we really talked about we need to build that trust with our students, and that really comes with that within that empathy, building trust with our students and building trust with our families. And one of the important things that we talked about was really getting to know a family's journey and how they got to where they are. So whether you have a student with a disability or you don't, it's just important to get to know your families and build that trust with them so that you can better reach your students, reach all of your students. We also talked about supports and resources in the community. So even that social awareness, bringing in the community, understanding what type of community you're teaching in and being aware of the social influences that these students have, the culture, the backgrounds that they're coming from for each family, and recognizing that every family is unique and every student obviously then is unique. Obviously, that also connects to diversity and really recognizing that we all have these unique experiences and backgrounds and families and communities, and how important it is to celebrate those within our classroom and to bring those into conversation. So we talked about that restorative practice circles towards the end of the semester, and that also had to do with the social awareness. Number 4 is responsible decision making. And even on the Understood website, it talks about universal design for learning. And that was practically our entire class, right? How we can create a universally designed classroom, not to be a one size fits all, but rather that we are thinking about all of our students and we are planning for different experiences, and we're allowing for different opportunities for our students to learn in different ways. And so we talked a lot about giving students choice in their learning. So when we talked about differentiation and the difference between differentiation and universal design for learning, and we talked about inclusion, and we said how important it is to give students choice and voice in what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, and then setting them up with those opportunities as the educator. That's our job. And the fifth one, and one of the most important ones, is the relationship skills. And you know how strongly I feel about building positive relationships, healthy relationships with all people that you're working with. So whether it's your students, whether it's your families. And we also took a time to talk about co-teaching. And if you remember, we actually even did a conflict survey, conflict resolution survey. How do you deal with conflict? And really starting to go back to the first core competency, but being self-aware. How do we confront situations in our classroom when we disagree? How do we train students to do that? How do we do that as people, as educators, if we are co-teaching? And how do we mesh two different personalities and two different ways of teaching together in order to benefit the group? And so that was a really big one we talked about. So I just want to kind of give you that opportunity to remind you of all of those core competencies that were integrated and intertwined in every single topic that we talked about. It's almost like a way of life instead of one, separate topic. And so I know that what we talked about in the foundation that we build in ECIS 3700 is going to set you up for success in this course and for moving ahead in your future classrooms. So I hope that you are now kind of going back and saying, oh yeah, I remember each of those experiences, and that's going to get you ready for your next course. So I miss you all. Take care and have a great semester.